Sparky Lovesey, an unforgettable odyssey brimming with witches, ancient secrets, dark deeds, and magical adventures. Part 6. The Age of Veyanor. At the Roffertree Inn, there was much revelry when the two witches returned. Beth Geller was forced to reluctantly tell the others how she had been saved by the stranger, the inn swiftly applauding this and raising tankards of Grimmargle wine to Veyanor. Even those who'd first seemed hostile now appeared keen to celebrate the stranger's victory, as Lafron and Brutal expertly kept everyone's flagons filled. After an hour, Lafron reached up with her own wand from behind the bar and rang a large cauldron hanging over her head. "Sisters," she announced as the room gradually quietened. "Truly, it has been a most memorable evening. Our stranger is a stranger no more, and from this blink snap will be known to us all as Veyanor." Veyanor smiled as the room applauded, beginning to feel quite at home in this most curious of places. "So which coven will you join?" a bindnap by her side asked her. "'Tis the question that vexes all of us. And just because you be most proficient on a broom, you don't have to be a lid sister. Remember, you also be a maker of things too." "And a spuddle teller," an earth weaver added, belching loudly after too much wine. "Our coven places much store in all the old spuddles. A good teller would be welcome amongst us. Why don't you join us?" A crooked hat pushed her way forwards. And if you like hats, especially splurt ones, we'd be more than happy to have you wearing one with us." Veyanor laughed, thanking them all. Such kind offers, and without wishing to offend, I must confess that I already belong to a coven. Perhaps one of the oldest and most forgotten. I think I'm probably its only surviving sister too. The League of Lid-Curving Witchery. "Never heard of it," a Blinksnap called out. "Sounds splurks, and the name be too much for a mouthful for a start." "Then perhaps," Ron called out over the laughter, "you could all do with a little elucidation." "Never heard of that neither," the Bindnap replied. "Sounds like something right painful to me." Lafron sighed, turning to Veyanor. "Forgive them," she said. "They don't get out much. Perhaps you could educate them?" So for the next hour, Veyanor held the entire inn in rapt attention as she told them all she knew of the League. Its origins in the Howling Lands, Algarin, Utar, Idla, and a perilous adventure across the icy seas. No one uttered a word during the telling, caught in all the spuddles, as Lafron and Brutal once again silently went from table to table, refilling tankards. "So you see," Veyanor eventually said, "although I'd be more than humbled to join any of your covens, I'd much prefer it if we all combined to make one League of Lid-Curving Witchery, as I'm now more certain than ever it's what the ancients would really want." "But how?" a crooked hat frowned. "I can't suddenly just give up whole life of wearing splurts hats and being hostile for no reason. 'Tis in my very bones, passed me by my equally hostile forebears. It would surely be a betrayal to be anything other than a crooked hat. Who amongst us here would give up the very essence of what we are to be part of something else?" The others murmured and nodded in quiet agreement. Lafron quietly surveyed the room. "Maybe," she suggested, "you could be both." She turned to them all. Maybe you can be both, still members of your own cousins, but also part of the one league. After all, 'tis surely the spirit of being Zorkly that binds all sisters together, no matter what coven they belong to. The witches silently considered this. Pressing what she sensed might be an advantage in the lull, Lafron quickly ordered them all outside, into the garden. There, she retrieved the magical branch from Veyanor's broom and gently brushed it against the trunk of each tree that circled the inn, while the others watched, confused. "This be the magical Ruffer trees," she declared, her voice echoing in the huge cavern. "From now on, their branches will give you extra Zorkly magic for all of your brooms." The witches watched as the ends of each branch of each tree gradually began to glow a fiery red. "Every year you can return here and take some new Ruffer branches for your brooms. They'll give you extra speed when you fly, but if any are used for splurt or hostile acts, they will fail you. They are a gift from the ancients, and as such you will honour it both as coven members and proud sisters of the League of Lid-Curving Witchery. Now, take to your brooms, bind on some Ruffer, fly out to your homelands and tell all of the creature witches what has happened here tonight, the night you all became part of the Spuddle of Veyanor." The witches quickly set to, climbing the trees, breaking the glowing branches and binding them to their brooms. Soon the entire cavern was filled with ear-shattering roars as the witches flew up and away into the tunnels, yelping and whooping at new ferocious speeds. After, Lafron showed Veyanor back inside the now empty inn. "I have something for you," she said, reaching behind Grimwaggle barrels at the back of the bar. "It wasn't just the raven stones that were washed ashore. During the storm, Algarin's boat also lost an oar. A part of it has been here for many generations. Perhaps it was simply waiting for the right witch to own it." She pulled out the long shaft of wood. "Mind, I've made a few changes to it over the years. Just a hunch." Vanna gasped when she saw what was once the oar, now transformed into a magnificent witch's broom, complete with an elaborate dragon's head carved onto the front. "I'm thinking you'll have many an adventure on this," Lafron smiled. "First it crossed the icy seas, now it'll be off on new travels in the twinkling lid. As above, so below, a truly Zorkly broom." Veyanor held it in her arms, scarcely able to believe it had once been used by Algarin and her courageous fellow travellers. "It's sastaculous," Lafron teased. "Indeed it is, but more importantly, it be waiting for some Ruffer for you to start its next Zorkly journey. You have much to do, Veyanor. 4 covens need governing, and the witches need saving from that splurt quarter of yours in Trasgar. I don't think you've a blink snap to lose." They walked outside, Veyanor binding Ruffer branches into her broom and instantly feeling the roaring power in her hands. "Don't fret," Ron laughed. "It's perfectly safe, and we'll bring you back here whenever you want." Veyanor climbed on, the broom already desperate to leave. "But there's so much I need to ask you." "I know," the frog replied, "but really, I think you know most of the answers already, don't you?" And before she could say another word, the broom took off and sped away across the cavern, out into the dark tunnels and whatever lay beyond. Throughout her long life, Veyanor went on to achieve many magical and Zorkly things, including liberating the witches of Trasgar, settling awkward disputes between the 4 covens, establishing the League of Lid-Curving Witchery rituals to mark important annual and seasonal celebrations, and perhaps most impressively, gaining acceptance and respect amongst Dale's creatures of all descriptions. Witches were no longer thought of as simply raucous, one-wielding Twizzly sisters, but as creatures in their own right, with their own magic, customs and culture. By the time the ancients called her, Veyanor was widely recognised as the first Grand Zorkly High Priestess of the League of Lid-Curving Witchery. And whilst many others would follow, few would have the far-reaching impact she did. However, for all her achievements, the solution to one problem had always eluded her: solitary witches. Scattered throughout the magical dale, these witches continued to keep themselves to themselves, intensely suspicious of the Four Covens, the League, and all its activities. However much Veyanor was congratulated on her achievements, she also knew deep in her Zorkly heart that without the full participation of solitary witches, the League of Lid-Curving Witchery would never achieve its true magical potential. It would take one very special witch before it was finally and spectacularly reached. History shows us that the emergence of any new culture or civilization is never without its sticking points, and the same is true of the League of Lid-Curving Witchery. Whilst some rush forward to greet the new dawn of change with open arms, others shy away into the shadows, fearful of its consequences, resentful of its presence. Such was the case for the solitary witches of the magical dales. Outsiders, shunned by each of the Four Covens, solitaries were treated with more or less the same hostility as Ragnhilda was in the Howling Lands many centuries previously. Whilst they were unlikely to meet the same grisly fate in a boiling cauldron, nonetheless solitary witches knew full well that to be surrounded and captured by any of the Four Covens was to be avoided at all costs. Humiliating rituals, caging and burning down their small woodland hovel was commonplace. The solitary witch only finally released when the others had done with her, casting her out to try and resume whatever life she could far, far away. It was a problem Veyanor had wrestled with for much of her time as Grand Zorkly High Priestess. Her wish to create a truly united league was always frustrated by both the solitary's natural reluctance to join and the Four Covens' hostility towards them. The whole problem seemed quite intractable. Plus, being solitary, no one ever knew just how many there really were, or if they had any sort of leader. And with such dangerous levels of persecution, even finding the constantly moving witches was a huge task in itself. Veyanor knowing full well that even if one was tracked down, it was unlikely she would be brought before her, as there was too much splurked fun to be had with the unfortunate creatures instead. In one final effort, Veyanor decreed that rewards would be offered for each solitary witch brought to her unharmed. Her intention was to be able to spend time explaining just what the League of Lid-Curving Witchery meant, and hopefully encourage other solitary witches to join. However, she also knew full well that the success of the scheme relied upon each of the Four Covens agreeing to the idea, because they truly believed it to be right, rather than just an easy path to rewards. The first 10 witches brought to her were quite obviously Coven imposters, badly disguised to look like solitaries. Towards the end of her life, wearying of the problem, Veyanor had to accept that despite her best intentions, no single witch could be the one who changed everything. Gradually, she realised that like Algarin, she had merely been a stepping stone. It would be up to another to finally combine all the witches of the magical dales into one all-embracing league. Who would that be? When it would happen? How it would all come about? She had no idea, yet somewhere within herself she knew that it would happen, but not within her lifetime. On the night she passed to the ancients, Veyanor took to her bed in the large building that now stood as the League's central meeting hall. As a structure, it was quite splendid, a testament to the combined skills of all Four Covens. The Bine-Naps had built it, the Lid Sisters conceived the lavish design, the Crooked Hats worked as Bine-Nap labourers, and the Earthweavers had infused the building with special magic. When finished, it was considered so special, It attracted the attention of many Dales creatures who travelled long distances to bask in awe at its splendour. Together they stood and marvelled at the witch's feat, amazed that such a building was even possible. Some creatures even began cautiously employing the services of bind maps, something the resourceful makers were only too glad to agree, as Dale creatures were frequently far more stupid than fellow witches, and hence easier to manipulate for the inevitable bind they'd soon find themselves in. Yet generally, the meeting hall served its purpose admirably, not only as a magical place for Zorkly ritual and governance of all four covens, but also in forging links between witches and Dales creatures, as a cautious trust between all parties slowly grew. Indeed, twice a year, on the summer and winter solstice, a great festival was held for both the dignitaries of each magical dale and representatives of each coven. There, over 2 days of feasting, with Veyanor presiding, agendas were decided, disputes settled, mostly without too many splurked incidents. But on Veyanor's final night in the hall, the mood was more sombre. Some amongst those gathered feared for the future. What would happen once she had passed to the ancients? How long would the fragile truce between Dale creatures and witches really last? Who would become next Grand Zorkly High Priestess? Summoning the 4 coven leaders to her bedchamber, Veyanor painfully raised herself and spoke. "It was always my intention," she told them, "to be nothing more than a spuddle teller and broom maker. Those days are, of course, many moontones ago. Idler and the ancients called me from Trasgar for a higher purpose, showing me lands I'd never imagined, friends I'd never met, and opportunities I could never have believed existed. And now, as fate decrees, I too have been called, and will shortly leave on my final journey. My one regret is that our fellow solitary witches have declined to join our league, friendship." She looked at the 4 hushed faces around the bed. "I have one more duty left to perform. The choosing of the next Grand Zorkly High Priestess who will take my place." All 4 coven leaders bowed gracefully. Veyanor first addressed the elegant Lid sister. "Beth Gala, whilst you are unbeatable on a broom, the next Grand Zorkly High Priestess will also have to keep both feet very much on the ground. Step back. You have not been chosen." Beth Gala did so, trying not to scowl too obviously. Veyanor turned next to the Crooked Hat. "Brutal. Whilst you enjoy your fun and splurk jokes, the next Grand Zorkly High Priestess will also have to know when to shed tears for her subjects too. Step back, Brutal. You have not been chosen." Brutal shrugged. "Rather glad, really," she admitted. "I'd have been a really splurked High Priestess." Next, Veyanor addressed the leader of the Earthweavers. "Alfloria, the next Grand Zorkly High Priestess will not only need a heart for nature's magic, but also a head to make the practical decisions and ears to listen to the wisdom of the ancients. Unfortunately, you have neither, and have not been chosen." Alfloria reluctantly stepped back, shooting a look at the last witch, the leader of the bind maps, who was already beaming expectantly. "Before you get too excited, Teggart," Veyanor warned her, "it's not you either. Spectacular's maker of things you may be, but the next Grand Zorkly High Priestess will also have to make plans, alliances, peace, and decisions, and none of your tools will help you with those." It was Beth Gala who broke the awkward silence. "So, may I ask just who will be our next Grand Zorkly High Priestess?" if not one of us, then who? Veyanor nodded, her elderly eyes closing, as somewhere deep inside she felt the warming contentment of the raven's wings wrap slowly round her. Her words were barely audible. It will be the sister who brings the willing heart and mind of a solitary witch to this place. And with that, while the others simply saw a body on the bed, Idla flapped her great wings and took Veyanor on her final journey, eyes glinting as she assured the elderly witch that all was well, and the ancestors were already waiting for her. The four witches looked from each to each other, knowing Veyanor had gone. Far from happy, none had been chosen from amongst them to take her place. Moments later, it had been agreed that no one else would ever hear of Veyanor's strange final request. Everything had to be kept secret. Together, they would surely find a way to bring the heart and mind of a solitary witch to the meeting house. They simply needed time and a plan. A great Zorkly passing ceremony was held on the small plateau of the Raising Stone a few days later, with witches and dignitaries from all 15 magical dales travelling to pay their respects. Feasting, drinking, singing, laughter, music and dance rang out over the entire Torchlit Valley. Never had so many witches and Dales creatures gathered together in the same place. Afterwards, as the revelry continued in the Prophetry Inn, the four coven leaders discreetly headed to a small upstairs room with a jug of Grimwaggle wine, telling the From they were not to be disturbed. "I dare say you'll be sorting out the new Zorkly High Priestess," the landlady said. "There's folk already saying that the odd none has been chosen. Sooner it be resolved the better, methinks." Beth Geller narrowed her eyes. "Such matters are for the sisterhood, not innkeepers. Leave us be, if you don't want to feel the sting of our wands." After Lefron left, the four filled their goblets and discussed their dilemma. However much they disliked hearing her words, the landlady was right. The witches were wondering what would happen next. Once the celebration stopped and the splurked heads cleared, everyone would want to know who was to be the new Grand Zorkly High Priestess. "What we need," Beth Geller said confidently, "is someone we can make Grand Zorkly High Priestess for a short time whilst we sort out the problem between us. We find ourselves a complete splurk and utter no-hoper. Make her leader, then stroff her, once we can bring the heart and mind of a solitary witch to the meeting place." The others considered this, Teggart nodding along appreciatively. "Well, no one else was in the room when Veyanor stroffed. No one else heard her last request. We can say she decreed anything, surely. Who's to know otherwise?" Puckle, leader of the Crooked Hats, agreed. "A fine plan. But who do we choose? And who has to stroff her afterwards?" Alfloria of the Earth Reapers had a suggestion. "I do know of one such witch who may be suitable." The others all leant forwards. "A most splurked weaver, one I've always had my doubts about." "And you'd also be prepared to stroff her when the time came?" Beth Geller pressed. Alfloria frowned. "I've offered the witch, that's enough. Someone else can stroff her." "What's her name?" "Sinchkin," Alfloria replied. "And I can speak to her in the morning." If there was one thing other Earthweavers knew about Cinchkin, it was that it would be very unlikely that the fiercely independent witch could be found anywhere on any given morning. Granted, she had a small and rather modest burrow, but even a casual visitor would know its owner didn't use it very often. For Cinchkin, home was wherever she might choose to lay her small witch's hat. On her head, under a twinkling night sky, by her side in a dripping cavern, or as a pillow high in the treetops of a vast forest. For Cinchkin was a traveller, a wanderer, and enjoyed nothing more than seeing as much of the magical dales as she could. Small villages, towns bustling with every description of creature, sweeping dales stretching as far as she could see, always wondering just what lay on the other side and hoping she'd find out the very next day. In her years, she'd travelled to all 15 dales, yet knew in her heart she'd never see enough. Other places, creatures, magical mysteries and spectacular sights would always elude her, yet she'd resolved this wouldn't be for the lack of effort on her part. When she did return from her trips, other Earthweavers would gather in her burrow to hear fantastic tales and spuddles of all the places she'd visited. Some would sit agog, open-mouthed in wonderment. Others would shake their heads, insisting no good would come from such splurked adventures. But we're all sisters of the earth, mountains, forests, valleys, rivers and lakes, she'd explain to them. We keep the secrets of such places. Not to see them, feel them, touch them, taste them, smell them, is to miss their most powerful magic. And then someone would ask for a demonstration of what she'd learnt, or demand she concoct a new potion from plants taking on her travels. But Cinchkin would always refuse. At coven gatherings with feasts, she would entertain fellow Earthweavers twice her age with tales of her adventures, standing on tables, amazing them with her discoveries. At the end, she'd always ask her enthralled audience if anyone would care to venture with her on her next travels, but all would politely decline, preferring instead to hear rather than experience the magical worlds beyond their homelands. Which suited Cinchkin fine. She bore no grudges and even understood their need to stay rooted. It simply didn't work for her. No one ever knew when she'd return. Sometimes she'd be back in just a moon turn, other times her burrow would be empty for 6 whole seasons. And yet in those times, if anyone had bothered to venture inside and look closely, they'd have made their own quite extraordinary discovery. For right at the back, beyond her modest bedchamber, was a long curving passage that opened onto another, much larger room, full of precisely drawn maps of her travels. For Cinchkin was as much a chronicler as an adventurer and explorer. Alongside her many parchment maps were volumes of books of different plants and creature species she'd encountered. One entire wall was covered with maps stitched together to make one of the most comprehensive studies of all 15 magical dales ever undertaken. The words, such as they were little more than symbols, each carefully arranged around the drawn centrepiece, making the entire room quite the most breathtaking study, and known only to Cinchkin. For most, she was either an irresponsible, loudmouthed, unreliable adventurer, or a true heroine, finding new lands and the best entertainment at any gathering ever. But if any had truly got to know the plucky little witch, they'd have found quite the most fastidious and intelligent soul they could have come across. Yet for all her many travels, there was one magical place that had always eluded her: Trefalpugger Path. She'd first heard of the mysterious, ever-moving series of valleys, woods and rivers many years previously on a visit to Sveigdale, a 4-day journey by broom and foot over the tallest mountain ranges. There, in the safety of the town, warming herself by a large tavern fire, she'd met slow jarrocks for the first time. These large, cumbersome, bear-like creatures were phenomenal guzzwort drinkers, and as the evening wore on, gradually took the little witch into their confidence. You can't be calling yourself any kind of adventurer until you've set foot along Trefalpugger Path, one told her. He pointed at her with his razor-sharp claws. Now I tell you this, I may be the bravest Jarrack from round these parts, but there be no way I'd be trying my luck on it. How do I find it? Sinchkin asked, immediately curious. This path seemed too good to resist. The Jarrack merely laughed. You don't find it, he said, downing his garden water. It finds you. How? If I knew how it was that a path could have a mind of its own, I'd be the richest Jarrack in all the magical tales. On another of her travels, she met a Lid sister who claimed she'd once flown over the path, amazed to see the land underneath changing and twisting before her eyes. It's said that no witch can ever land on Treffelpucker Path, she told Sinchkin, and those that have been so foolish to try have been instantly strafed. For the path is merely for Dale's creatures to venture along, and then only those it itself has chosen. Some of them never return, lost forever, doomed to wander and starve, eventually strafing from the many tricks of the path. Some creatures say that it's the oldest part of the Dales, Spadle's tale of Treffelpucker Path being the very beating heart of all that's magical. But 'tis well to be aware, for it has a cruelty too, a wickedness, and none of your Zorkly kind has ever been offered the chance to journey along it, which is just as well. For the blink snap that we set one foot to the ground, we'd be consumed by fire. Now, if all this sounds rather off-putting, and the sort of place to leave well alone, especially if you were a witch, it's also worth remembering that for Sinchkin, the worse the warnings and spuddles became, the more she wanted to experience the peculiar magic of Treffelpucker Path for herself. It intrigued her beyond all measure, occupied her waking thoughts, and lurked in the back of her darkest dreams. Yet no matter how far she'd journeyed, how far she'd flown on a small broom, she'd never once caught sight of it. Inevitably, this simply made her more determined. To find the elusive path and record its movements would surely be the greatest ever discovery for any Zorkly adventurer. So it was that a week before Veyanor passed to the ancients, Sinchkin once again packed a small bag with provisions and set off on her broom high into the sky to resume her search for Treffelpucker Path, ensuring she was as far away as possible from a burrow when Alfloria and a large entourage arrived with news of her ascension to Grand Zorkly High Priestess, named by Veyanor herself on her deathbed with her final breath. However, in front of the empty burrow, Alfloria's face dropped. Another Earthweaver, Sinchkin's nearest neighbour, stepped forwards. She took to the twinkling lid a while back. Alfloria sighed. Oh, on another of her splurked adventures, I suppose. The witch nodded. And of course no one knows where she's gone or when she's going to be back. The witch shook her head. Croidal shaman, Alfloria cursed. The whole league is hearing of Veyanor's last wishes, and now Sinchkin is nowhere to be found. With respect, the witch cautiously tried, I'm not sure it would have made any difference. She's always been more of an adventurer than a Zorkly leader. Alfloria narrowed her eyes. Listen very carefully, you splurk. Sinchkin has been chosen, and Sinchkin it will be. Now spread the word. We have to find her as soon as possible. Completely oblivious to the intense search, Sinchkin was determined to make one final journey to find Treffelpucker Path, no matter how long it took. Even the thought of 5 years was fine. She'd never been away as long, but then again the prize had never been greater. To finally find and map the path would be her crowning glory. It didn't matter if a single soul never saw her maps, drawings or notes, or if no one believed her stories. She would know, and that would be enough. Sometimes she worried about the risks, but nothing truly magical had ever been achieved or discovered without them. Besides, she told herself, there were risks everywhere, and if she were to stroff on a most magnificent quest, surely it was better than living in a boring burrow for her remaining years. The dangers of the path just drew her even more. She began by flying north, away from her homelands, far out over Winchett Dale, Hoffdale, Alfisdale and Spadedale. She was searching for the coast of the northernmost tip of the magical dales itself, where the land met the chilled waters of the icy seas. From there, she resolved to journey east on foot along the many coastal pathways leading to Kipsdale and Seviusdale before heading back west through the mountains of Calvertdale and Ariusdale. She planned the route quite thoroughly, taking sections of maps and relevant notebooks from previous expeditions. But whereas those trips had been to explore the boundaries between dales, this time she wanted to explore each in turn, stopping in the darkest forests, investigating the deepest caves, travelling the widest rivers. If Travel Pugger Path was real, Cinchkin was determined that this time she'd find it. Most times on her travels, she'd meet up with Dale's creatures who might tag along for a few days. Whilst initially glad of the company, such encounters frequently yielding valuable local information, all too often they became rather irritating, and she was left stuck thinking of ways of sending them on their way without causing too much offence. She supposed that for Dale's creatures she represented a peculiar novelty, a lone witch out exploring with no real agenda other than to record her discoveries. And perhaps this was true. Most of the Dale's creatures were fairly harmless, keen to show her things they thought she'd be interested in, endlessly curious about her lifestyle. Yet for all the many things she'd been shown, all the boring conversations she'd been forced to endure, she'd learned precious little about Travel Pugger Path. So on this journey, she determined not to be distracted by Dale's creatures, as really, they most likely wouldn't be able to offer anything relevant anyway. And yet, of course, the moment she decided, fate showed its curious hand, or in this case, the long black wing of a raven in a small witch's hat. You have been listening to The League of Lid-Curving Witchery by Phil and Jackie Lovesey, adapted for your audio enjoyment by Ursula Griffith and Stoltz and Phil Lovesey, who would like to point out that no creature witches were harmed during the making of this Magicast. For more information about creature witches, the League, Matlock, Hare and the Magical Dales, simply visit www.matlockthehare.com.